Okay, hi everybody. Now we're into week 3, right? How quickly the class zips along here. And this week we're looking at the topic of government and power, right? Initially, week 1 we looked at the idea of what was the role of government, what was just behavior. Last week in week 2 we introduced religion and government, the idea of friendships, maybe and how government should behave, right? Once we introduce, the role, what they should do, then last week we introduced, okay, here's what we want them to do. So then week 2 becomes, well, how they go about it. Should they behave in a certain way? Okay, so we're trying to make everything, we're trying to link everything together as best we can. So this week, what is the power? What can they make us do? Right? So we start with week 1 was, here's what we think the government ought to do. Then we look at last week, well, here's how we think is the best way to get society to behave and government to behave and what how they should act when they're getting to do these things. And then now the power. See, power is about force, okay? And we're looking at chapters 6 and 7 in the book this week. We're focusing on Machiavelli and Hobbes, two philosophers who really understood power. Hobbes was pure and simple the first social contract thinker, and we'll talk more about social contract next week, but the first social contract thinker that basically said the government needs the power to do whatever the government needs to keep society civil, to keep society functioning, okay? Because Hobbes lived through the English Civil War, and so he saw the problems when there's too much controversy. So he said you need to give government power to do what they need to do to keep things running smoothly. And people will agree to that because people don't want to always live in fear all the time of what could or couldn't happen. So you give power to the government to take care of them. Machiavelli, on the other hand, understood that power was important, but Machiavelli kind of personalized it. And he started looking at why people get power, and then how can you get power, and then once you get power, how do you keep power? See, and the idea isn't always maintaining power for nefarious purposes. Machiavelli's looking at the notion of power in the sense of, how can I maintain my leadership? How can I maintain control of the government? So that's the way we're kind of looking at those two guys this week. Now, as I said, right, so week 1, it's the role, what should the government do? Week 2, maybe the behavior, how should we go about doing this? Friendship, religion, morality, those sorts of things get introduced. Now, this week, again, it's as I say, it's about power, it's about force. So now in America, we're always careful to try to balance how much power we give the government, because the more power the government has, the less freedom we have, right? It's that liberty security thing. The government can make you very secure. In a totalitarian state, you're secure. They control everything, but you have no liberty. So we're always looking for that fine line, that Goldilocks, just the right balance of how much power do we give the government to make us do things, but yet keeping the government out of our lives to the best of our ability so we're free, okay? So that's kind of the way we think of it as Americans. It's a liberty versus security thing. But when you think about terminology, remember, as I say, power is the ability to force you to do something. The government has the power to force us. But see, there's also the term authority you have to be aware of. Authority means that it's properly acquired, right? Authority is who can do it, right? Parents have the authority to discipline their children. My boss has the authority to tell me what to do, okay? Parents have the power. They can force children to do things. My boss has the power. He can force me to do things, okay? But that power and authority have to be kind of obtained legitimately. People have to agree it was properly obtained, okay? So someone who comes in and overthrows a government, they might have power, and since they're the leader of the government, they have authority, but they're illegitimate because they weren't elected or chosen by the people, or they didn't get that power in the appropriate way. So that's the way you have to think of it. There's power making you do something. Authority, are you the right person to make people do things? And legitimacy, did you obtain that authority in the proper manner? See, illegitimacy can undermine a government regardless of how much power it has, because people don't believe that the people in that position of authority went about it the right way. They don't trust and feel that it was their authority and the power they have were properly obtained. Okay? So that's the way we want to think about power a little bit this week. Now, keep in mind this, in the discussion this week then, again, as good Americans, right, we're always looking for, how do we keep the government from abusing power? You have to give the government power to control and run society, but you also have to control that power that you give it. So how do we go about giving government enough power to keep us safe and maintain a civil society, but at the same time not allow it to abuse its power? Okay, and I'll talk about more of that in the live lecture. In the writing assignment this week, we look at the same sort of thing. Just because a group or organization has the power to do something, then the question would kind of harken back to, should they act that way? Remember, week 1 we looked at the idea of that immigration issue, maybe some stereotypes and racism, that the idea of just behavior. Then last week we looked at the resume issue. Ooh, how should we act, right? When dealing with friendships and people you know and like, and what should you do, right? And now this week, we look at it's an EEOC issue, right? We're trying to apply. So they have the power to do things. They are the authority to do things. But should they? Or do their actions abuse that power? Right? So again, I'll talk more about that in the live lecture, but that's the way you want to look at that. Okay, so that's what we have this week. We're looking at power. Once we create a government, we decide what we want the government to do. We start to develop the friendships and the moral basis for this society. Now we give this government power. We say, okay, go ahead and now do these things. How do we control that power? When should they use that power? And then one last thing, remember this week, we also have the outline for our course project to do this week. Okay, so again, I'll talk more about that in the live lecture. All right, so that's week 3. Week 3 of chapters 6 and 7, Machiavelli and Hobbes, looking at power and government. Okay, I look forward to our discussions this week, and I'll hopefully see you in the live lecture. Bye now.